Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into something truly profound. We're unpacking Chapter 2 of our source material, titled The Power to Forgive Sins, originally delivered back on January 7, 2001. Now, this isn't just some abstract philosophical debate, it's a deeply practical look at human resilience. If you've ever felt that crushing weight of trying to get absolutely everything right, or if you've been completely derailed by a sudden failure, the framework we're going to explore today is going to be incredibly relevant to you.
We're diving into a text from The Laws of Great Enlightenment. And what's really fascinating here is how directly it addresses those immense unspoken pressures of modern society. It doesn't just hand out empty platitudes. Instead, it offers a multi-layered path to rebuilding our lives when things go south, perfectly bridging the gap between everyday practical resilience and a much higher transcendent perspective.
Okay, the text hooks us right away by asking a pretty uncomfortable question. Are we demanding a perfect life in a fundamentally imperfect world? I mean, think about it for a second. We are constantly bombarded with messages saying we need the flawless career, the ideal relationship, the perfect track record. But the author suggests that these extreme demands, this relentless, exhausting pursuit of a perfect life, might actually be the very source of our deepest despairs.
That brings us to Section 1, the trap of perfectionism.
Let's look at how the pursuit of the ideal, which, sounds like a good thing on paper, can actually become a highly dangerous trap. The author points out a devastating reality here. Extreme perfectionism is identified not just as a quirky personality trait, but as a root cause of modern despair. It's even deeply tied to the tragic rise in suicide we're seeing in contemporary society. Think about it. When your baseline standard is absolute perfection, any failure literally feels like the end of the world. The text argues that this unforgiving brand of perfectionism leaves people with absolutely zero psychological safety net when things inevitably go wrong.
And this perfectly illustrates a fatal disconnect. When we buy into the illusion of a perfect life, expecting a flawless existence where everything just magically goes according to plan, we are completely unequipped to navigate our actual flawed world. So the crucial takeaway here is that living entirely in this mindset means we're unable to handle the reality of human imperfection. That massive gap between expectation and reality, it just becomes a breeding ground for severe emotional crisis.
Moving right along to Section 2, Embracing Human Imperfection.
Now that we understand the trap, how do we bridge that gap? Well, the source grounds its philosophy firmly in real-world inevitabilities. We're talking about unexpected accidents, maybe encounters with crime, corporate bankruptcies, or just massive career setbacks. These aren't bizarre anomalies. They're literally just part of the human experience. The author stresses that unpredictable, sometimes terrible events will happen. If you're a perfectionist, a bankruptcy or a career failure feels like a permanent stain on your identity. But the text challenges us to look at this entirely differently.
And this brings us to a highly liberating concept. The author writes that we must accept unpredicted situations and failures merely as one experience. Stop and really think about the power of that phrasing. It's not a fatal flaw. It's not the end of your story. It's simply one experience in a long, complex life. By reframing a harsh setback as just a single data point, you instantly strip away the catastrophic weight of perfectionism. You completely detach your core worth from a temporary failure.
Let's look at Section 3, the strategy of withdrawal.
The text actually gives us a highly practical roadmap for when we do hit rock bottom. To bounce back, it outlines 3 clear, actionable steps. First, like we just talked about, objectively accept the failure. Treat it as merely one experience. Second, formulate a strategic withdrawal plan. This is absolutely vital. It's not about blindly pushing forward when you're defeated. It's about having the wisdom to tactically retreat, assess the damage, and rest. And third, use that withdrawal period to gather your strength so you can prepare to restart and rebuild your life. It is a calculated, practical cycle of recovery.
Which leads us to Section 4, Transcending Rational Limits.
Let's be honest for a second. What happens when practical withdrawal strategies just aren't enough? What if the psychological wounds are so deep, or the injustice so profound, that a simple restart plan feels completely impossible? The author makes a fascinating pivot here, noting that rigid, rational standards and laws often fail to provide real closure for deep personal crises. I mean, you can win a lawsuit and still feel fundamentally broken, right? To truly rebuild, the text points us toward the transcendent world, arguing that true recovery requires time, intense effort, and a willingness to look way beyond what is purely rational.
The text states boldly that we must believe in a world beyond rationality, embracing religious miracles and immortal truth.
When you're entirely crushed by the world, relying solely on worldly logic just isn't going to save you. You need a much more expansive perspective. By believing in immortal truths, the idea that our existence and our learning continue far beyond this immediate moment of failure, we find a much deeper well of resilience. It essentially shrinks the current disaster down to a manageable size against the backdrop of eternity.
Finally, Section 5, the power to forgive.
All these practical strategies and transcendent perspectives culminate right here. The text introduces this beautiful definition of what it means to have the courage to forgive. It starts from the absolute fundamental premise that humans are inherently imperfect. And because we're imperfect, we're going to make mistakes, and others will absolutely make mistakes against us. So, to survive and thrive, we have to cultivate the courage to grant grace. This means forgiving others for their flaws, but maybe even more importantly for the modern perfectionist, having the immense courage to forgive yourself when you stumble.
Looking at the Japanese cover of the text, Daigo no Hall, or the Laws of Great Enlightenment, we can really see how this entire philosophy comes full circle. Ultimately, this text guides us out from the darkest depths of worldly despair by offering a dual approach. It doesn't force you to choose between the practical and the spiritual. It combines highly practical resilience, like the strategic withdrawal plan, with an expansive, transcendent belief system that allows for genuine grace and forgiveness.
I want to leave you with this final thought as we wrap up this explainer. When you face your next inevitable setback, because as we've learned, it is definitely coming, how are you going to respond? Will you choose the crushing, destructive burden of perfectionism? Or will you choose to see it as simply one experience, bridge the gap to the transcendent, and find the courage to forgive and rebuild? The choice is entirely ours. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring these concepts in your own life.